So I got involved with Compassionate Choices in about 2005 as a contractor. I ran my own business, which was a movement building business and an organizational consultation business. And I was immediately drawn to this organization, both because of the mission of the organization, but also the leadership of a single individual who I now consider a personal mentor, a little bit of my own personal crone, if you know what that is. Yeah, my spiritual guide as well. And last year, over a period of time I have worked with the organization. Last year, I made a huge life decision, which was to basically curtail my work within what was a very successful practice working for choice and responsibility from what I refer to as the cradle to the grave. And focus specifically on one issue, which is compassion and choices. And it was in part because of the leadership of our speaker this afternoon, who I think there was probably no other person that I would do this for and do this work for in this way, and having made this transition. She, as you can read in the book, I mean, she has just all of the right credentials to be the leader of this organization, and I would say the leader of this movement. She has a background in healthcare as a nurse, as a physician's assistant. She's been an attorney in private practice, has worked with the U.S. Senate, not with the Oregon Senate around healthcare and health policy. She was one of the original co-petitioners for the Oregon Law and Initiative. She's been a crusader for end-of-life care and health access for an extremely valuable portion of the growth, of the evolution of this issue as it comes into the mainstream eyes of the country and into the world that is going to have to be addressing it in the very near future. She is relentless in her pursuit of the mission of the organization and in her pursuit to squeeze every last penny out of every last dollar to pursue that mission in as effective way as possible with our donors' dollars and with our supporters' funds and volunteer hours. She's also been a tremendous fundraiser for Compassionate Choices, having expanded the organization to its nearly $10 million size today and over 50 staff people through her leadership and tenacity in pursuing both the funding and the capacity necessary, as well as, I would say, getting the right people on board to help meet the challenge of the future. I go on a little bit because I'm afraid I'm going to either cry or, miss something. So perhaps what would be best if I would just kind of ask her to step forward and for you all to acknowledge why you may have just met her or become familiar with the work of Compassionate Choices, that she is one of the founding mothers of this work within this modern end-of-life movement. And so with great deal of happiness and glee, I'd like you all to help me welcome Barbara Coombs Lee, the president of Compassionate Choices.
So much. Oh, talk about gonna cry. I was going to, further on in my talk, I was going to do much of what Mickey did, was to acknowledge the extraordinary effort put forward by so many people in Compassionate Choices over the last year to make this happen, and acknowledge every team leader and every team member. He so beautifully did that, but one person, of course, that he did not acknowledge, who really is the person who owns this conference, who has conceived it and implemented every last detail, who's responsible for making the right decision in the 10,000 decisions that have to be made about every detail to pull off a spectacular conference like this. Mickey said that he was happy to join this organization. I told him once that the thing that I am proudest of is building an organization that attracted him. So really, let's give a round of applause to Mickey, who made this possible. It's also my honor to present 2 awards today. The first award is called the Hugh Gallagher Award. It's named after Hugh. Hugh Gallagher was the first person with disabilities who joined our board when we were a little tiny organization, Compassion in Dying, located in Seattle, Washington. Hugh was a giant of the disability rights community, of the disability rights movement. He was the originator of access legislation long before the ADA. He was a hero to us, a hero to me, and we're so honored to be able to commemorate him every single year. Because one of the people who also loved Hugh Gallagher was a fellow FDR scholar, Peter Kovler. And so Peter Kovler makes it possible every year for us to acknowledge Hugh Gallagher by giving an award in Hugh's name that recognizes and applauds the person who has done the most in the past year, and in this case, over several decades, to bring people to our movement and to raise the visibility and the credibility of our movement. We are giving the Hugh Gallagher Award this year posthumously. We're giving it to Dr. Peter Goodwin, who was my co-campaigner when we began in 1993 to draft the Oregon Death with Dignity Act. There were about 10 or 12 of us, and there were 3 of us who then went on to be the chief petitioners. That was Peter Goodwin and Al Senard and me. Al Senard died about 10 years ago. Peter Goodwin died this last year. I have no hesitation in saying that without Peter Goodwin, without his leadership, without the extraordinary stature and love that he enjoyed in the medical community, the Death with Dignity Act would not have been possible. He single-handedly persuaded the Oregon Medical Association in the 1994 campaign to remain neutral. That might not sound like much, oh, just neutrality. Neutrality is everything when you are talking about a subsidiary of the American Medical Association and a Death with Dignity law. Peter Goodwin made that happen, and then he didn't stop there. After the passage, he continued to fight to protect the Oregon Death with Dignity law from the federal, state, legislative, executive onslaught that it withstood for the next 4 years. He and I campaigned again together in 1997 when the law was challenged, and then he went on to help implement it. Really, he guided so many of the early participating physicians. He held them by their hands, said, look, you can do this thing. You need to follow these rules. You need to make these assurances, but I'll be here by your side as you tend to your patients, and we can work through this Death with Dignity law together. So he is really responsible. I understand that we have a little video of Peter, so I'd like to introduce him to you and have you hear his words. This footage that you're going to see is Peter, as he was really quite close to death. He had already decided that he had endured enough of the downhill course from his Parkinson's disease, which he had had for about 10 years at that point. So we see him here with a beard. None of us knew him with a beard. Peter Goodwin was clean shaven his whole life, but when he couldn't shave anymore because of his Parkinson's disease, this is what he looks like. So you're seeing him in out of the persona that we didn't really know very well. Are we going to be able to show? Yeah, we are.
I decided that I needed to do something active in order to help terminally ill patients. I went to see the incoming president, who I knew. He said, Peter, don't waste your time. You don't have a hope of changing the attitudes of the Oregon Medical Association members. And the second time, he took a different tack and said that we do it all the time, and we do it without anybody knowing. And my reaction to that was that often without the family knowing enough, without the patient knowing enough, because it's all illegal. And so I wanted the patient in control, not the doctor. I went down to the meeting and I said what I had to say. And as I came back to my chair at the back of the hall, my eyes met the eyes of the incoming president, this man that I was referring to. And after a pause, he went to join the podium, went to the podium and waited his turn. And then he said, "Let the people of Oregon tell us what they want." I was absolutely amazed, but anyway, I'll take some credit for that. And so what happened then was that the Oregon Medical Association were neutral throughout the campaign, and I think that had a huge influence on the outcome. Now, I have a terminal illness, and there is no treatment for it. As soon as I knew enough about it, I decided that sooner or later I would be asking my physicians for a 6-month prognosis. And they have accepted that, all 3 of them. And so I have a 6-month prognosis, and so I have the medication in my possession. All 4 of my children know that I'm going to take advantage of the Oregon Death with Dignity Act, and they are all regretful but supportive, and so are their spouses. You know, it's interesting that I've sort of tried to visualize what it would be like, and it'll be a very, very sorrowful time, I can assure you. I've always accepted the idea that if push came to shove, and if I qualified for the law, that I would use the law.
I don't know if you can read that. Dr. Peter Gooden died on March 11th, 2012. He was surrounded by his 4 children and their spouses, and a Compassionate Choices volunteer was with him as well. To you, from falling hands, we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. Thank you, Peter. I could go on and on. We loved him so. Here to accept the Hugh Gallagher Award on behalf of his children is Sue Porter, our Compassion and Choices volunteer. Yeah.
It is such an honor to be here to represent Peter Goodwin and his family. I had the privilege of being with Peter when he died. It was such an honor. This was a man of knowledge, skill, tenacity, and anyone who knows him in this room can also say he was full of humor. I am accepting this in behalf of his 4 children. They are Philippa Sonicson, Nicola Nadig, David Goodwin, and Michael Goodwin. And I would like to just read to you a message that they asked me to communicate. We would like to express our gratitude to those at Compassion and Choices who were so helpful and supportive to Dad, as he made his choices and preparations, and they shepherded us, the family, through a very difficult process. And in accepting this award, I would just like to communicate Peter's last 2 words before he died, and those were, "Love abounds." Thank you.
Sure, take it. Yeah. Oh, what a guy he was. The next award I have the privilege of bestowing is from the President's Council on Service and Civic Participation. That's the President, as in the President of the United States of America. The Council was established in 2003 to recognize valuable contributions of volunteers are making in our communities and encourage more people to serve. They say recognizing and honoring volunteers sets a standard for service, encourages a sustained commitment to civic participation, and inspires others to make service a central part of their lives. The President's Volunteer Service Award recognizes individuals, families, and groups that have achieved a certain standard measured by the number of hours of service over a 12-month period or cumulative hours over a lifetime. We're awarding this as a sponsoring organization for the Council to 13 volunteers who have given in 2012, in the last year, each over 500 hours of service to the organization. They are Arlene Hinckley, Dariana Mooney, Esther Bell, Jean Rimmer, Gretchen de la Roche, Jordis Jensen, Linda Jensen, unrelated, Mike Houston, Monty Burke, Nancy Crumpacker, Peter Lyon, Sue Porter, and Tom Preston. Here to receive the award on behalf of her colleagues who exemplify the kind of dedication to community and to others is Dariana Mooney. I'm gonna make you stand here while I read this. President Obama says, "Congratulations on receiving the President's Volunteer Service Award, and thank you for helping to address the most pressing needs in your community and our country." In my inaugural address, I stated that we need a new era of responsibility, a recognition on the part of every American that we have duties to ourselves, our nation, and the world. These are duties that we do not grudgingly accept, but rather seize gladly, firm in the knowledge that there is nothing so satisfying to the spirit than giving our all to a difficult task. Your volunteer service demonstrates the kind of commitment to your community that moves America a step closer to its great promise. The group will receive a certificate that says presented by the Corporation for National and Community Service to end-of-life consultation volunteers of Compassion and Choices in recognition and appreciation of your commitment to strengthening our nation and for making a difference through volunteer service. And you each get a pin. I'm going to pin you.
We can rotate it.
No, everyone gets a pin.
Oh, good.
No, you don't have to share your pin.
Good.
Yeah. So, Dariana, on behalf of 13 volunteers.
Stop that. Stop that. Thank you very much. I cannot tell you how honored I am to represent so many amazing people in something that I feel very passionate about. We want good deaths, and we want peaceful deaths. And we need to address the fact that some of ours aren't very good, mostly not in Oregon, of course. We're doing really well. I want you to know that it is deeply felt by many of us that this is our life's work, that everything we've done so far in our life has led us here. There are no mistakes. We are passionate about what we do, and we want to instill passion in all of you. I know it already exists in most of you. I really encourage you to consider volunteering, if you aren't now, for Death with Dignity in your states or country, and make sure that this continues, that we improve the quality of death in the United States and be a little bit more like the people that we may have come from a long time ago. Death is to not be feared, but to be embraced, and I truly feel that. We are change agents, and we can make a difference. We are to empower our clients to talk their truth, to open their mouths and talk their truth, and not prolong an inevitable thing that can be beautiful. And I want to remind you that there is a film out. It's called How to Die in Oregon, and I'm sure the bookstores had it. It can be ordered on Amazon or from Compassion, and I hope that all of you at some time or another soon have the opportunity to do this work in your individual communities. Thank you very much, and thank you for an exceptionally good conference. I learned a lot, and I've been doing this 14 years. So actually, I've been doing it 70 probably. So, thank you.
Yeah, you get to take this. And this. We'll frame them. No.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we came together 3 days ago to celebrate our successes and, quite frankly, to prepare ourselves to achieve more of them. Many of you have spent time in individual sessions preparing in your own private way, preparing for intimate, perhaps difficult conversations with your loved ones, preparing to talk with your physician, preparing plans for peaceful dying when your time comes. Others prepared to be agents of change in their communities, in their state houses, throughout the country. Others just drew comfort and companionship in meeting like-minded people. One person said they felt like they were at a Trekkie conference. We are like-minded. Comfort from hearing and telling stories of courage and of facing loss with wisdom and with grace. Well, challenges will certainly remain, but our future will, I assure you, have more success than disappointments because of who you are and what you do and how you participate with this organization, Compassion and Choices. We have reason to be hopeful. At this time in our country's history, we see that paradigm of relentless bodily invasion. It is finally starting to shift in medicine. And this is, at least in part, due to our movement. Because over 30 years ago, we, our predecessor organizations, started the National Public Dialogue about end-of-life choice. Litigation all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court showed that the problems that we tackled could not be trivialized. And victories at the polls showed that they could not be ignored. We were the rational voice for advanced planning during the Terri Schiavo fiasco. The New York Times reported that the deepest fear of our constituents Compassion and Choices constituents was that someone else, a perfect stranger, would make decisions for them, and God forbid that that would be a politician. Passage of the Affordable Care Act started up this fear-mongering machine again that we had seen with Shivo. But this time, did you notice, fewer politicians actually got in line to crank up the machine. After years of political posturing, you can see that the death panel talk is finally starting to give way to rational discourse in the Washington Beltway. And Compassion and Choices is part of that discourse. And it's important that we be included in the policy discussions because we are unique. Compassion and Choices is the only national organization coming to end-of-life issues from a consumer perspective. Certainly, there are consumer organizations and organizations of elders, but generally, they know little and care less about the end of life. Instead, they play into the death phobia that we heard Stephen Jenkinson speak of. I call these organizations the sex on the golf course organizations. It will continue forever. And then there are the hospice and the palliative care organizations. They are the providers, and they know about end-of-life medicine. But what they have cared little about is what the dying themselves really need and want. We alone, Compassion and Choices alone, are the experts in end-of-life care who speak for the terminally ill and those who love them. And unlike any government or healthcare industry or elected bodies, we speak for the people for whom the experience matters most. And being close to death, these are also the people who stand well beyond any corrupting influence of financial gain. Our movement deserves credit for giving voice to people's desire to die in peace and at home, for holding providers accountable for undertreating pain, and reigniting interest and faith in advanced planning. You know, 5 years ago, experts were exhorting the nation to give up on advanced directives. People can't plan for uncertainties, doctors don't follow them anyway, let's just abandon them. But they were the only tool, as imperfect as they are, that people had. So we did not give up on them. Instead, we vowed to put teeth into advanced directives. We drafted powerful addendums to articulate wishes more clearly and extend them to dementia. We prepared a good-to-go resource guide with tips and forms and even a game to play with loved ones to see if your loved ones truly understand what your deepest wishes would be. Today, more people are talking about mortality and their wishes and filling out advanced directives than ever before. One sign of progress is, as I read recently, someone observed that it's now much less common for people in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's disease to have a feeding tube inserted. But the Centers for Disease Control reported that 64% of elders in 2009 died in intensive care units. 64%. We can take some credit that commentators looking at that statistic see it not as just a statement of the standard of care, but they see it as a problem. Moving to specific achievements, look at all our community of activists has achieved together in the last few years. Just 4 years ago, Oregon was the only jurisdiction where aid in dying was openly practiced without fear of prosecution or professional discipline. Compassion and Choices was a newly formed organization. We were mighty in our potential, but quite frankly, we were just getting on our feet after 2 years of very strenuous effort being born. Other organizations were unwilling to join hands with us, and we were usually left out of important policy discussions, and human rights debates. We had achievements, however, substantial ones. They were primarily three. The Young Compassion and Choices had provided aid in dying consultation and support to thousands of people across the country already for 15 years. We had done this carefully, discreetly, effectively, without any incident or legal challenge, and that was an achievement. We had already stewarded Oregon's law, providing access to patients and guidance to physicians so that every single report, every single research study coming out of Oregon reveals impeccable practice, flourishing hospice and palliative care, and no risk to vulnerable people. That was a real achievement. And we had improved care in other states with aggressive and successful pain care advocacy in legislatures and courtrooms. We had much to be proud of 4 years ago, and that work certainly goes on. But there's also no doubt that this community's strength and spirit, forged in the heat of the unification of two great organizations, has spent the last 5 years, I'll say, blazing a trail of advances for liberty, one after another. November of 2008, all the energy and activism that had been directed to Washington State paid off. The voters decisively and firmly rejected the fear campaign of opponents, and they gave Washingtonians the same right as Oregonians to peaceful dying. It was a landslide. Landslide, almost 60-40. The Death with Dignity initiative carrying almost every county. And you all made that happen. You, the community of Compassionate Choices activists and supporters, you won that campaign. You said to the world who was watching closely, Oregonians are not some peculiar breed of renegades. The yearning for freedom at life's end will not be quashed, and it will not be contained to just one state. That very next year, the Montana Supreme Court echoed the refrain. A government owes its citizens dignity and respect for the person's autonomy, the court said. It cannot prosecute physicians who comply with a rational and enduring request from a dying patient for medication to craft a peaceful ending. Immediately, Montanans begin talking with their families and with their doctors openly about aid in dying. Physicians in Montana have complied with requests, and hospices in Montana have accommodated patients who chose aid in dying. Montanans became empowered and free, and being part of the Compassion and Choices community, this is your accomplishment. When the Montana legislature met last year, the anti-choice activists thought it was a foregone conclusion that they would be able to overturn the Baxter decision, overturn their own Supreme Court. They introduced a bill to criminalize aid in dying and to punish Montana doctors. They thought it would be a slam dunk because their colleagues in Idaho had passed a very similar law with practically no effort just the year before. But Compassion and Choices is strong in Montana. And so citizens came from every corner of the state, of every political persuasion, the Democrats, the Republicans, the state's multitude of independents, rose up to say no. We have the right to end-of-life freedom. We have enjoyed this right for a year. And you, our elected representatives, will not take it away. And they didn't. You helped them. You helped the people of Montana. You brought them the tools to communicate and organize and petition their government. You know, it's the only time that a battle for aid in dying has ever been won in an assembly of elected politicians. After aid in dying survived the legislature, the Montana Medical Licensing Board assured doctors that it will treat aid in dying the same as any other end-of-life practice. It will evaluate complaints that might come to it according to the prevailing standards of practice in the state. You did this. Part of Compassionate Choices, you have prevailed. This is your accomplishment. In Hawaii, a few anti-choice politicians have blocked advances for over a decade. In 2002, one religiously conservative legislator held out against the governor, Governor Cayetano, and a majority of his colleagues and bottled up a death with dignity law in his committee. Well, last November, we brought the legal reasoning similar to Montana's court to bear in Hawaii, and we publicly asserted that Hawaii's legal structure is already permissive of end-of-life choices. Founding members of the Hawaii Physician Advisory Council for Aid in Dying began openly serving a consultation and referral function between terminally ill Hawaii residents and the medical community. Now clients coming to Compassionate Choices are referred to council members who evaluate them and coordinate with their attending physicians and carry on a model end-of-life medical practice that includes aid in dying. In February, doctors and community leaders toured the state, advising citizens of their new options, teaching healthcare providers about the practice of aid in dying. Several qualified patients in Hawaii have received prescriptions openly for a medication that would be life-ending if they took it. Several patients have received this in the last 8 months. We polled the citizens of Hawaii. We found that 88%, an astoundingly high majority, 88% of Hawaii residents believe in the freedom to end life on one's own terms. But the powerful forces have been able to thwart enabling legislation in the face of 88% of the will of their people. Well, we decided, and we have been successful in simply going around them. And today, terminally ill Hawaii residents have doctors to turn to, doctors who will openly consider an aid in dying request and treat them without bias and with respect. We are prepared to provide these courageous doctors the most expert and vigorous legal defense possible if they face criminal or civil charges, but we honestly believe they are unlikely to need it. The people are overwhelmingly on their side, and civic leaders in Hawaii are building a protective shield of support in the healthcare and the academic and the legal and the public service communities. The people of Hawaii are free and empowered with choices at the end of life, and you all did this for them. You freed them by being part of the Compassionate Choices community. I'm sure most of you are aware that across the nation, millions of people suffer needlessly because their doctors simply never tell them about hospice. They never offer peaceful options like palliative sedation and the simple withdrawal of all the tubes and machines. People acquiesce to torturous, fruitless treatments because they think they have no other choice. But today there are laws in the states of California and New York that instruct doctors to reveal all options for end-of-life care, including a comprehensive description of the benefits and the burdens of each. These laws say to physicians, you may not trap patients in ignorance, describing only the treatments that you find morally acceptable or the ones that you want the patients to accept. In these two very populous states lie the vast medical training grounds where young doctors first learn their trade before scattering across the country to open their practices. Because of these laws, which we call Patient-Centered Consultation Acts, PCCAs, they will learn in their formative years that by law they owe patients information, not false hope. They will develop the habit of giving meaningful information, information that patients will find useful to navigate the final leg of life's journey. The duty to inform will spread throughout our nation with these doctors, and a new standard of care will take hold. I can't tell you how much anti-choice forces detest these laws. I think it's because they empower patients with knowledge of treatment that might conflict with religious doctrine. Let's make it clear, these laws create no new options. They simply require disclosure of currently legal options. But here's some of the headlines describing those bills, that bill in California, that were headlines in the California Catholic press. Watered down euthanasia bill seems sure bet for passage. California legislature sends bill promoting suicide to governor. California approves nurse-assisted suicide. California pushes death by sedation. Schwarzenegger signs bill authorizing starvation of patients. You get the idea. PCCAs are not all that, but they are a mighty transformation that, quite frankly, all the good intentions and all the physician CME units in the world could not have brought about. It took an organization with the courage and the will to impose a duty on doctors that the profession refused to accept and embrace on its own. You all, part of the Compassion and Choices community, you are giving dying patients the gift of knowledge, and from knowledge, empowerment, and choice, and peace of mind. You are doing this. One such choice that patients usually don't find out about from their doctors is the choice to voluntarily stop taking in food and fluids. But to reject nutrition and hydration is legal and constitutionally protected in every state. The U.S. Supreme Court assumed in the Cruzan case that everyone has the right to refuse the bodily invasion of artificial feeding. Simple logic says that force feeding by mouth is surely included in that assumption. The only question in Cruzan was whether a state could require clear and convincing evidence of the person's true desire. The court found that it could, and the state of Missouri, where Nancy lived, does. We know that appetites naturally diminish in very old age. We're all looking forward to that. Some of us are looking forward to that. And also as life ebbs from whatever disease or injury might be primary. A body ceasing to nourish and hydrate itself has been humankind's natural life-ending mechanism since the dawn of the species. Voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, VSED, as it is known medically, is painless and peaceful with good palliative support. It is not limited to the setting of terminal illness. VSED can be a workable choice for people with early dementia, chronic debilitating illness, advanced frailty, or a cascading set of infirmities and physical distress. This, of course, was the situation that you heard about, that Neil described with his parents, Dorothy and Armand. When in their 90s, they exercised the VSED option with the guidance of Compassion and Choices. You learned that their loving and stalwart family came to their side, overcame eviction from the assisted living facility, and saw them through to almost simultaneous peaceful deaths. Well, people deserve to understand that they have this option. So the Rudolph family teamed up with Compassion and Choices to raise awareness. And major news outlets, including ABC News and the New York Times, told the story. And Neil Rudolph toured New York and Colorado, California, a host of states, talking with seniors groups and churches and libraries. That campaign yielded over 50 million impressions, 50 million opportunities for people to pick up a newspaper, listen to the radio or TV, read a blog, learn about the right to intentional and peaceful dying. The Rudolphs left our nation a powerful legacy of knowledge and understanding, and you helped them do it because you are part of this Compassion and Choices community. Who are you, this Compassion and Choices community? What are you like? I want to characterize you. First and foremost, you are mature adults. When Congress was debating health care reform, it was scary, to see how easy it was to gin up this frenzy of fear and anger with scary messages that reminded people that death is inevitable. The idea floated for a while that it's highly dangerous, it's tyrannical to encourage doctors to talk with patients about what kind of treatments they would want if they were terminally ill and they couldn't speak for themselves. That's why the provision to reimburse doctors for consultation and advanced planning is not part of healthcare reform. The national dialogue leaped from modest proposal to outrageous hyperbole so fast, it's clear to me that there is something profound and quite apart from advanced planning consultation that is at work. I think we witnessed a collective temper tantrum of a public being told about death. You are the adults in the room. You are able and willing to stand by reality. Hello, America. We are all mortal. God made us that way. And we know in our hearts, and the wisest among us live every day acutely conscious of life's impermanence. Politicians playing into America's pathological denial of death treats mature individuals like children, and very young children at that. Researchers tell us it's normal for children aged 3 to 5 to not see death as final. Between 5 and 9, children come to accept that death is final, and they can think about its happening to others. By age 10, a child is usually ready to start thinking about his or her own death. Our national leaders deliberately sparked fear and anger over a consultation about death, and our sensation-obsessed media threw fuel on the fire. They would have us remain a nation of 5-year-olds, stuck in an infantile refusal to acknowledge and grieve over and plan for our own deaths and the deaths of the people we love. For shame. For shame. Certainly that is no way to come to our greatness as a nation. Certainly such stunted psychological and spiritual development is not what it means to be a human being created, as many believe, in God's image. But you adults understand that coming into the richness of being means living a life of thoughtful discernment and conscious decisions, and that includes decisions about the end of life. A couple of years ago, the New York Times was carrying a story about the demise of the order of the Sisters of St. Joseph, and they told about the care and intention in which the sisters were managing the individual deaths of their very aged nuns, because the entire order is dying out. They are thinking about their dying, and they are talking about their decisions. It quoted Sister Mary Lou Mitchell as saying, "We approach our living and our dying in the same way, with discernment. Maybe this is one of the messages we can send to society by modeling it. Well, you in the community of Compassion and Choices have this in common with the Sisters of St. Joseph. Who knew? In adulthood, which is unfortunately is a kingdom far from our shores, the leaders will foster dialogue, and they will pass laws that will help constituents on that very human quest to discern and embrace both life's sweetness and death's certainty with equal grace. Second, you are people who are grounded in the integrity of your own values and your beliefs and your own relationship with the transcendent or the divine. Contrary to our anti-choice opponents, you tend to rank dignity as a value over dogma, free will over destiny, and self-determination over obedience. You're likely to draw on a variety of religious traditions to inform your own spiritual beliefs, and you probably consider love, not life, to be the ultimate Christian value. Regardless of your faith tradition, you have little difficulty imagining actions that, if approached carefully and prayerfully, might extinguish life in the service of love. A set of values and beliefs built over a lifetime can be so strong that it feels like torture to have them wrest from us as our deaths approach. Lived values constitute our personhood, and you're the people who understand others, who are so passionate about their values that to die in a manner that abandons them feels like the meaning of their life is being stolen. What greater robbery could there be than robbery of the meaning of your life? Responsibility is another aspect of the moral construct we live by, you live by. If we foresee the consequence of our actions, we feel obligated to shoulder the responsibility for it. Contrary to those who depend entirely on a rule of double effect, to authorize acts and omissions that relieve suffering and also probably cause death, we who know death will result from actions like deactivating a pacemaker or ceasing kidney dialysis, we are unlikely to evade responsibility by claiming we did not intend that outcome of death. We don't like to sidestep responsibility. Spiritual maturity and authenticity compels us to accept the burden of responsibility and measure up to its rigorous demands. Last year, almost exactly at this time of the year, that archaic and discredited assembly of dogmatic authoritarians, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, met in Seattle to chastise Compassion and Choices by name. They called our compassion false and our choices immoral, and we took it as a badge of honor. It's a sign of integrity to be not denounced by a group that is so thoroughly lacking in a moral compass of its own. When, yeah. Some of you, I'm sure most of you, are familiar with the 1974 film Harold and Maude, and it came up to the top of my Netflix queue. It's one of my favorites. I watched it 3 times. If you remember, it's about a love affair. It's a love affair between Maude, who is this very lively, impulsive, she's an elfish woman. She's approaching her 80th birthday, and she's having a love affair with Harold, who is a morbid, psychologically abused by his mother. He's mentally disturbed, quite frankly, teenager. Maude's passion for life draws Harold in. It draws him completely away from what has been his obsession, which is feigning these grotesque suicides for his mother to discover. He learns to embrace life from a woman who is preparing to die. Well, one night, Harold and Maude are sharing a hookah in the train car that she calls home, and he chides her. He says, "Oh, Maude, you're teaching me vices." And Maude says, vice, virtue, it's best not to be too moral. You cheat yourself out of too much life. Aim above morality, Harold, and you'll live a full life. Well, you, my friends, are part of a community whose values aim far, far above mere morality. Third, you are courageous, you are altruistic, and you do not shrink from battle. You sense, either thoughtfully or intuitively or both, that the law and policy around end-of-life decisions is bigger than just the few choices that a few people might make. If it were only about that, our opponents wouldn't care so much and they would not fight so hard. There are big shifts of power at stake, and our struggle is as old as civilization. It is at least as old as the Reformation. Authoritarianism stands opposed to self-determination. Dogma opposes the validity of individual spiritual experience. And in our modern society, a centralized medical authority competes with the idea that physicians are called in service to humankind. Well, we fight these battles to win, but winning is certainly not assured. Campaigns that feed fear, they do often carry the day, I'm afraid. But I will say this. Even when individual battles are lost, our community still wins in important ways. Because dogmatic authority weakens every time it is challenged. Individuals standing tall for their ideals inspires others to examine outworn assumptions and mindless habits. The voice of humankind's eternal yearning for freedom is raised and it's heard and it is passed on to those who follow us. You have done all this time and time again, and you have reason to be proud. Finally, you are people who know that making friends with death is the key to a happy and a passionate life. Perhaps this desire to be on speaking terms with death is one of the things that draws you to compassion and choices. You may agree with Albert Camus that there is but one freedom: to put oneself right with death. After that, everything is possible. Or with Mozart, who wrote that the image of death was not only no longer terrifying, but is indeed very soothing and consoling, and the key which unlocks the door to true happiness. This week, we suffered the loss of Nora Ephron, whom many of us love, who immortalized herself with one line in a film that will live forever and ever, and that line is, "I'll have what she's having." But many of the commentators about her death have noted that she was a woman so full of life, but her writing is filled with references to death. One of the things that she wrote was, you should eat your last meal every day, because when the time actually comes to eating your last meal, you probably won't feel much like it. In any case, you folks, you are unlikely to want to invest in the burdens of invasive procedures to buy a few weeks of mere existence with depreciated value and none of the joys or human capabilities that make life rich and purposeful. I don't think Most doctors fully realize how deeply people care that their ideas and their principles govern their end-of-life story. Doctors seem to think that what matters most to people is how many days they exist on this planet. That's not the case for us. No, for us, and in fact for most people, if you poll them carefully, it's not how long our days measure, but the measure of our days that grips our minds in the quiet moments of dawn. When we awaken, we thankfully greet another day. We might give an appreciative nod to our acknowledged mortality. We comfort ourselves with these hopes, that our lives will be full in companionship, in purpose, and love, and that our deaths will be on our own terms, in full expression of who we are and the life we lived. So how do we ensure these things for ourselves? How do we secure them for others in the future? What is your role, you of the Compassion and Choices community? It's important because the people in this room form the core of our activist community. You are among the most seasoned and knowledgeable in the field. We're growing, and we're growing in visibility, and so demand for our projects and our programs is expanding across the nation. We need you to be leaders and ambassadors. We need you to share your history and your knowledge and your talents with the newcomers who will come. They will need end-of-life consultation skills. They will need materials to serve clients. They will need information and stories to educate the public. And they will need messages and tools to build a network of advocates and persuade policymakers. Our fiscal year begins tomorrow, and during that fiscal year, Compassion and Choices will operate in full campaign mode in 4 major geographic locations, and we need people to lead and work and organize in all 4. In Montana, we will rally the state once again to keep lawmakers from overruling the Baxter case and keep aid in dying safe and accessible for all. In Hawaii, we will fortify the human shield that protects our brave doctors, and we will build a supportive network that reaches from the governor's office, the legislature, the universities, the hospices, the medical organizations, to the most remote communities of the neighbor islands. In New Mexico, we will prepare to prevail in a lawsuit that asserts that state's laws do not ban aid in dying. We will connect and organize people throughout the state to raise awareness, build the expectation of choices, and protect a legal ruling against anti-choice legislators. On the East Coast, we're investing $500,000 in a campaign called Critical Mass because it's coordinated with the Massachusetts Death with Dignity initiative. We will organize grassroots supporters on the ground in Massachusetts. We will mount a massive telephone and door-to-door voter education effort. It needs to be powered by thousands of active supporters in the region. We will promote awareness through a series of neighbor-to-neighbor coffees and house parties, town halls, public forums, and we'll reach out to media and opinion leaders and local activists. If you live in any of those locations, Montana, Hawaii, New Mexico, New York, New England, we need you there, we need you now. If you live anywhere else, we need you both locally and nationally. Because in our nation's capital, our influence grows in direct proportion to the number and the enthusiasm of our supporters. So thousands need to sign up now as a member or an e-activist so we can count you, we can count them when we talk with congressional staff or opinion leaders and our fellow nonprofits, our fellow NGOs. NGOs are enormously influential in Washington, and Compassion and Choices is now a full and valued member of a number of them. One is the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. You heard them present in a session during this conference. It's a coalition of over 200 of the nation's most active and respected social justice organizations. We also bring our perspective to new audiences through membership in the Centers for Excellence in Assisted Living, the American Constitution Society, the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, and others. Our chief national objective this year is to persuade Medicare officials that it is an error to reimburse hospitals for treatments that patients did not ask for, did not want, and tried to reject in advance when they completed their advance directives. Visiting tortuous treatments on elders against their will seems an especially poor use of our nation's tax dollars. You can help. Sign up for our action alerts on the website. As we come into campaign season, visit your local candidates. Go to their town meetings. They will have town meetings during the election season. Ask about this issue. Ask where they stand. Hold them accountable. Be a watchdog in your town or your assisted living community. Report cases of unwanted treatment to Compassion and Choose Choices. We'll use these stories, we'll use these examples in hearings and briefings and media stories. Perhaps we will even press a claim for Medicare fraud. In anticipation of the Affordable Care Act, you know, hospitals across the country are eager to merge with or acquire each other so that they can be part of a big conglomerate. Catholic hospitals are part of this activity, and they always insist that the emerging entity, no matter which hospital was the acquired one, follow the ethical and religious directives for Catholic health care. They make this a condition of the deal, even if their equity share is as little as 10%, and even if the hospital they are merging with is publicly owned. The directives quite specifically forbid any act or omission that is taken with the intention to cause death. It's about what people are thinking. They create an obligation for tube feeding if it's needed to keep a vegetative person alive, and they instruct workers to teach about redemptive suffering if pain or other agonies persist after treatment. Local bishops interpret the directives. Local bishops have the last word on how they impact end-of-life decisions. Well, concerns raised by Compassion and Choices and others have thwarted proposed mergers in Kentucky and Arizona, and I know some of you heard those stories. Our testimony this month in Connecticut has officials taking a second look at a proposed deal in Waterbury. In Ashland, Oregon, we are seeking public assurances that there will be no loss of access to aid in dying from a proposed acquisition there. Not we, but alert citizens are the most effective preventive tool. Please watch the papers for news of proposed mergers and hospital reorganizations in your area. Alert us when communities are threatened with loss of services and religious restrictions on end-of-life care. Become informed. Gather friends and neighbors to write letters to the editor, call into talk shows, attend public meetings. You know, the citizens of Sierra Vista, Arizona won because they carried signs and they picketed the hospital day in and day out for months. We'll have lawyers and community organizers at your side to help you, but only the community itself has the authority and the ability to stand up and preserve the basic right to freedom of conscience in health care. As Thomas Jefferson so famously noted, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. We must be vigilant and active together. The social change and the justice we seek will not arrive quickly, but arrive it will. The long arc of history does bend toward justice, and the yearnings of ordinary people for dignity and respect will not go forever unheeded. Let us find strength in each other and in the knowledge that the human spirit inevitably prevails over the oppression of dogma and habit and greed and ignorance. Let us pool our strength and our collective wisdom together, engage in what will be a long twilight struggle, year in and year out, but we will keep the march of liberty going strong. May it be so. Thank you so much for joining us.